All right, everybody, we're going to give it another minute as everyone's entering in, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we can get started. We have quite a lot of content to cover today, and as people roll in, we'll start with the introduction. So, thank you everyone for joining in today. Really excited for the team we have here and experts and some of the data that we're going to share with you on the State of AI report for 2026 that we've put together, Darwin with Springbrook. Myself, Noam Eital, CEO and co-founder of Darwin AI. We got Dustin Heisler, Chief AI Officer and US GM. And then also Steve London, CMO and Director of Springbrook Research Institute. Uh, all of us are going to share some insights and data that we've put together looking ahead at 2026. I will say up front, if there are questions, feel free to put them forward. We'll leave plenty of time at the end to cover them. So just send them over to one of the panelists and we'll aggregate them together. Now, I started mentioning this and teasing this out, but really, I think this is a unique session and webinar because on one hand, we have Darwin bringing in-depth view, very deep data around how AI is actually being used. And that's one of the harder things to really tease out today in public sector. But then we also have the scale of Springbrook with the survey looking at over 3,500 customers across its footprint on the public agency side and giving some perspective from core ERP, finance, operations systems, which is going to be very enlightening today. So we'll cover both the in-depth and the scale. Going over what we're going to cover, and there's going to be a lot here, so we'll try and cover all of this in the time we have. Give you a bit of an overview of where things stand. Now, again, we're going to try and not make this amorphic, high level, but rather give data that supports and gives insight on how we're seeing things. What are the vendors seeing on the ground? What is actually happening from the application side? What are the agencies seeing as well? This is data that's coming from the Springbrook survey as well. Shadow AI leaderboard. So one of the things we'll talk a lot about is shadow AI, the prevalence of it. All of you are familiar with it, but what is the data showing in terms of the most popular tools that are being used that are used as shadow AI versus tools that are brought in formally through the procurement system? Threat assessment. This gets a little bit in the weeds of what is the vulnerabilities and the new vulnerabilities that we're seeing, data leakage potential, and the new risk vectors that AI and some of the usage is bringing with it as well. And finally, just not to leave it as a blank slate of here are all the problems, we'll give a little bit of a playbook of here are some of the next steps that would be helpful as you guys move forward. So we'll jump high level, right? There's two things going on simultaneously that are at odds with each other. There's a wild west of 75% of agencies that are using AI. Now we all know this. We're all using ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, all these tools. But in the flip side of that, if the majority are using it or day-to-day users are engaging with AI tools, only 14% of agencies have a sufficient governance structure that matches that. So there's almost over a 5x discrepancy, right, in terms of the readiness. And you can see that shadow AI is the majority of the usage. It's not the tools that you go and procure and buy. It's the day-to-day marketplace tools that we bring from the consumer world into our workplace. And today we're releasing the 2026 State of AI in GovTech, doing that partnership with Darwin and Springbrook together. And again, we're going to cover some of the data that's in there, but we're also later going to share how you can get the full report and some of the insights that can be helpful for you guys as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Dustin, and we're going to start by going first at what's happening from the enterprise level and across different agencies that we're seeing in terms of application and data usage on AI.
All right, thanks, Noam. We got a lot of ground to cover here and a lot of data as a part of it. I think as you look at what's happening in the footprint of AI utilization across government, this is actually a fun exercise we even do with our clients where it's an over-under as to how many different AI systems they think their environment has. And normally we see guesses, maybe in the single digits or maybe dozens of AI systems. But as we look at kind of the enterprise and right now what's happening, everything, every system, every application is embedding AI within it. And so it's very often that we'll see over 300 AI tools that exist within an organization. And it's interesting to kind of look at that. Although there's 85 kind of common AI tools we'll talk about that are identified, some similarities across these footprints, we are seeing much more AI starting to work its way into embedded delivery. Now, if you think about this AI conversation, there are three primary forms of delivery that happen. One is the stuff you know about that's like SaaS based or website based. Someone goes to chatgpt.com, they're using it, Copilot, whatever it might be. This is a dedicated kind of web based software as a service. The second is where there's a native application. Someone downloads one of these desktop applications, maybe it's Claude Desktop, or we have now the new Cowork product through Claude, and they're using something natively. It could be an offline model, could be, one of these different note-taking applications that resides on the desktop. The third, and the one that, as a former CIO, is a little scarier to me, is where they start to work their way into embedded AI and existing applications that you're using. And so, all of a sudden you have new features that bring AI into your environment. And that's the one that is surprising to most organizations because they don't realize that in using Grammarly or something else, that they're actually inviting all kinds of different AI utilization into their environment. So we've seen over 300 unique tools, but a common set of around 85 within the organizations themselves. Now, as we look at how we classify these tools, most of them are shadow, right? When you think about most organizations, you may not have an approved list of these are the AI applications that are approved, these are the ones that we're testing, and this is what's banned unless there's a state law against it. So it's very common that we'll see a large percentage of shadow AI within an organization. And this is stuff that you may not know about, stuff that is being used, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's being used maliciously. It just is AI that's outside of the enterprise control. It's outside of central IT's ability to control. We see, a good percentage of embedded, and often, the smallest percentage here are the AI applications that have been bought through an enterprise license, a Teams account or an enterprise or government ChatGPT account, smaller percentage of the overall footprint that exists here as an agency license. Now, once shadow AI is detected, what happens next? It doesn't mean that shadow AI goes away. In fact, as we look at this AI moment in this wild, wild west, very common footprint here is where we sit around, over three-quarters of, what we see is shadow AI that is constantly being identified by our technology that's lurking, that's continuing in the environment, that needs to be dealt with and needs to be categorized. We see about 22% of the normal footprint of AI being blocked or unauthorized. We see about, again, another 33, 34% being authorized and about 6% being tested. Basically, we call sandbox where someone puts AI into a more stringent set of testing where you may want additional safeguards or rules around PII. So I think it's a moving target, and just dealing with the initial upfront shadow AI and going through and doing an inventory also is not enough because it's constantly changing. New things are emerging, it's popping up. And just when it's like whack-a-mole, as Noam and I have talked about. Just when you've whacked one, another one pops up, and they not are all bad. Some of them are good, and some of them you want to bring into the enterprise from a control standpoint. But the vast majority of this is unregulated. It's not managed. It's outside of central control because someone might be using an offline model. Someone might be using something that is they personally bought as a part of this process. That brings us to kind of the leaderboard here in terms of what we see from a shadow AI standpoint. And again, these aren't just like malicious applications that you shouldn't use. There's a lot of good things on here. And so, ArcGIS, right? Definitely a major player within the GovTech space, often approved. ChatGPT, case by case. Maybe someone's a Copilot shop, but they still have a ton of free ChatGPT users that are going there and trying to do, administrative stuff. This is often treated case by case depending on what major tools agencies are looking at. Chat based. This may be one that's not familiar to most of you, but it's often interesting when you see the underlying AI that's being used by some of the large GovTech vendors. Oftentimes, there's API calls that go into Chatbase or OpenAI or other types of APIs that are powering these conversational agents or whatever it might be. So you're going to see a lot more of these aggregate providers of generative AI capabilities within applications, even if you're not contracting with them directly. Then you get into the other stuff. Again, Canva's not a malicious application, but it does have AI capabilities that agencies often will block here as well. And Noam, I see you've got something that you're going to say on that one.
Yeah, I think the interesting part here is so chat based, going to that first of all. This is one that usually is a surprise to a lot of agencies and customers we work with, where they're unaware of chat based being embedded in the tools that they're using. But the second thing that's also important is we have the top 10 here, but the long tail maybe is less frequent, but
Mhm.
as important because it's where you get a lot of the risk vectors. So all kinds of tools that some of them I've never heard of before, we see them pop up in the inventory. And there's endless examples. WordTune, an AI writing assistant, Kamingo, AI powered tutor. There's all kinds of different tools. Maybe some of you have heard of, but we're learning every day a new one. So the marketplace, as you guys know, is evolving every day, which makes it really hard for agencies to keep up with it under the old model of kind of firewall, trying to play whack-a-mole on catching the known AI applications.
Great point. So same thing as you get into Copilot, and there's two flavors of this, right? You got the Office 365 Copilot, then you have the Copilot that's embedded with Windows 11. And these are two different forms of AI, right? One has direct access to underlying Office 365 data. One is more in an OS level. And so again, they have to be separated, but still need the same guardrails. Grammarly is a very common thing that we see from a shadow AI standpoint, where individuals are using this to correct grammar and spelling mistakes and other types of things, not realizing always that this is something also that ties back to a cloud server. And if you ask Grammarly to write something more concise for you, it's going to take the entire contents of that document that you're working on and transact that to a cloud server, which may expose PII. Talk to books, Zoom AI Companion. We'll talk more about some of the meeting companions here and what's happening with them and Claude. And again, this is a whole set of different tools here. Some are general productivity tools, some are more specialized, tied to creation, and they're not malicious. They're tools that agencies may have pockets of that exist within their organization that still have to be managed as a part of it. Back to one of the questions in the chat, as you kind of think about the management dynamic and the basis that we use to determine whether or not agencies have necessary governance, I think a lot of times there's a few things that have to be there as a part of how we look at this. You need to have some type of policy guardrails in place that dictate the utilization of AI. Now, this could be a formal AI policy, or this might be handled through AI's intersection into an existing technology acceptable use policy where it's been updated for that. So some type of guardrail in terms of rules and regulations that dictates the behavior that happens there. Above and beyond that, there's different flavors and different levels of maturity that we'll talk about as we go forward, but we often see there needs to be something formalized that dictates what the agency's approach is to regulating, to managing, and to doing this. I live in Texas. Texas has the Texas Responsible Artificial Intelligence Governance Act called TREGA. And TREGA in itself is not a form of AI governance. It's a regulation that mandates forms of AI governance for state and local agencies with different types of parameters and hooks. And so we would say that doesn't mean every agency in the state has governance today, but it means every agency in the state has an obligation to put the right guardrails in place to ensure that they're complying with state law would be kind of one way to slice that. But it's a great question, and we'll dig into that in more detail. Now, as we look at use cases, this is another thing. What are people doing with artificial intelligence? How are they approaching this? And the vast majority of this is bucketed into general productivity, administrative functions, augmentation. There's been a lot of studies that have been released more recently. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you probably saw one that I posted over the weekend that shows that AI is not replacing people. It's augmenting the way that people work. It's augmenting the workflows. Now, there's more specialized AI that gets into a little bit more of a blurry setting there, but we've seen a lot of utilization with summarization, with finding ways to use AI to make that email more concise, to, help with brainstorming ideas. A lot of, even as you kind of get into some of the other general productivity things within applications, it makes people work faster, makes people work better, and a lot more to kind of go from that standpoint. And as we dig into things, one of the exciting things about Springbrook and having Steve as part of this conversation is, as we look at AI is working its way into existing applications and existing mission critical applications. And Springbrook has a sizable footprint and is one of the power players right now within the government finance arena as a modern cloud-based technology stack that's embracing AI. And so, Steve, I appreciate you joining us to share a little bit of context to some of the data that we have with your own data from your own user base. So, welcome to the floor, Steve.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the invite to this thing. And as preparation for discussing this, and let me take a step back for a second. Springbrook hosts an annual event for our users, and we had Dustin come in. It was this October at Vidar in Las Vegas. It's a 3-day affair, a lot of training, things like that. But we like to make sure that we bring our customers to the forefront of what's going on in terms of pundits within the industry, Dustin being one, specifically discussing AI adoption, AI utilization, the guardrails he just discussed, governance, yada, yada, yada. So in the course of providing that presentation, we were we have a lot of people asking questions. I'll get into this in a second. We were sort of taken aback by the number of people who admitted that they cavalierly use AI, specifically generative AI, to do things like draft letters to supervisors, come up with ideas for programs that may not have been presented to the public. In other words, what I'm getting at is this is sensitive information that they didn't realize that once they're putting into this AI agent, suddenly became something that anybody could scrape and look for. So if you're talking about PII, it extends beyond that. It extends to your agency's information and who do you actually want to see it. So there was a lot of eye-opening revelations about, oh, I didn't realize that. And I don't think that aha moment has actually occurred. And we're going to get into that. So as part of preparing for this role of appearing on this webinar discussing what we're seeing, and I run the Springbrook Research Institute as well, which means that we have worked with Dustin and some of his peers for years aggregating information and trends, presenting it to our customers, making it publicly available. We also do our own surveys. So we did a light survey in preparation for this. We've got 3,000 plus customers. We had 81 different local government agencies respond to this. And we just asked 5 or 6 simple questions based on utilization, governance, familiarity with the space. 74% of the respondents were municipalities. Now, our sweet spot is municipalities between about 2,000 and say 200,000. So you're going to find that within that, the core number of active participants is probably going to be in the area of about 8,000 to 70,000. Look at ask AI how many municipalities fall within that range in the United States. You're going to find the lion's share of them. There's only about 175 that actually have populations over 150,000 in this country. So that's the lion's share. This is Mayberry RFD. This is, if anybody knows that reference, this is where America lives. And because we have a finance platform, I'd have to say that the lion's share of the respondents were in the finance department. That being said, there's people in admin, IT, all sorts of other personas across our list. So 74% of the respondents were small municipalities. Yes, a lot were finance, but at the same time, finance is also looking for efficiencies. They're looking to find a way to use this in a workflow that cuts down the amount of manual work being done internally. And that's pretty much where the rubber hits the road on this. Maybe let's go to the next slide, Dustin. So, what does this mean? That being said, there is a lot of confusion or a lot of non-aggregated data yet in terms of what AI does. What is it about? What's it going to be used for? Now, we have tried to integrate it with workflows that make sense to people, as opposed to saying, hey, we got a shiny new object everybody's talking about. I can tell you right now, at our Activate 2024 event, very few people were talking about AI. We're talking about cybersecurity. We're talking about other applications. We were not talking about AI to the extent that we are now. So this has entered the conversation. That being said, you talk to the diehard technologists like, I was working on AI 25 years ago. You guys are just catching up. That may be the case, but guess what? We're all here now, and it's a reality. So be it as it may, you might have heard of that punk band back when they were just playing in a garage in Austin, and now they're at the Super Bowl. But everybody's enjoying it. So we're at a time now where it's reality. We're grappling with something that's a very fast moving phenomena, unlike the punk movement, which grew organically. This is a fast moving phenomena, and there's a lot of questions being asked internally. They're talking about it. What are we doing about it? What's generative? What's agentic? How do we put this in perspective? What does it mean for us? Do we have to jump on the bandwagon? So again, a lot of the agencies don't understand AI applications. Next slide, please. That being said, a lot of the agencies also don't feel that they have the internal resources to evaluate them. So what does that mean? I don't understand it. I don't have anybody around to help me evaluate and put the pieces together to see what I should be doing or not doing. So again, we're in the nascent stages of adoption, and we know that the B2B space is moving faster than the government space. The government space is typically risk averse. Risk averse being you're playing with taxpayer dollars. You're playing with other people's money. You can't obfuscate things. In other words, we're working under transparency issues. You have to make decisions that are in the best interests of the constituents that you serve. You can't take risks. So it's a slow moving field, and the adoption rate's going to be slow because, as Dustin and Noam referenced earlier, we have to have guardrails on these things, or things are going to go off the track. Next slide, please. Um, that being said, leading into guardrails, 61% of agencies lack sufficient AI policies. Well, yeah, there's a reason behind that because they don't know what they're playing with just yet. No one has all the pieces to put together. If you don't understand what game you're playing, you can't put the rules in place. That being said, we do know that exposing public information in a public forum, which is what AI basically is a no-no. So that would be one way of looking at a policy. Dustin will, I'm sure, unpack this later in the deck as and give you, which is the same thing he did at our presentation for Activate. Provide the audience with a primer on exactly how to start thinking about this and steps that you should be able to take. Um, in terms of what we do and how we're playing the AI space, it's very simple. Springbrook is an enterprise class platform developed from the ground up, cloud native for local government agencies. We are instituting AI policies in the same manner and the same risk averse manner that we think you should be doing. In other words, we're not doing it unless it makes sense. What does that mean? It means these things are integrated into workflows. These things are integrated into solutions that provide tangible results for our customers and or our potential customers, something everybody understands. So we're not jumping on a shiny object because it's running across the floor and we're like a squirrel. We're being thoughtful. We're digesting the information. We're talking to our customers. We're talking to our technologists, and we're putting things in place that make the most sense. I.e., if you use it, you're going to see a change in your workflow that creates more efficiencies and brings automation to the equation. And frankly, provides transparency for your citizens and stakeholders. It allows you the governance pieces that you put in place that'll be in tandem with your AI policy and gives you the tools you need to succeed and build basically the digital bridge to the smart community. So that's what we're doing, and that's why we certainly appreciate being brought onto this webinar. I hope that the survey we did has provided a little bit of understanding and fodder for conversation.
Thanks, Steve. And we'll make sure everyone gets a copy of that. So stay tuned because I have a link and a QR code that you can scan to get it here in a moment. So I wanted to talk a little bit about threats because as we think about the state of AI, we talked about some of the more common applications that we see. There's a wild west of new things that are emerging. You see some of the gaps in terms of the governance and guardrails that need to be in place based on what Steve was presenting and the importance of it. And the fact that this is really across all personas. It's not a CIO function, it's everything. But there's also growing threats associated with AI, and this is something that we look at very closely when you think about this. This is more than just blocking something, right? This is a totally different dynamic because the landscape is changing so frequently. So we want to talk a little bit about what are the AI threats that are out there? What are the agencies dealing with that are here? And I think Steve talked really well about kind of the data leakage via free tools. You all know in the process of using a free product, your data is the product, right? You are a vehicle. You're paying for it with your data as an aspect of how that is used. And I think as you look at some of these free tools, especially in the generative AI side, even with the insertion of ads that are coming, your data you have no control of. Once you hit enter on that prompt, regardless of what model that you're using, if data retraining and reuse is on, you don't know what's going to happen to that. Will that come back later? Did I expose any type of PII or private information that was there as a part of using that interaction? Even if it's not a driver's license, PII can take a lot of different forms, and you can start to get into very identifiable context based on what you provide. And so, understanding what happens after you hit submit, I think is really key. There's, of course, a big thing around model misuse and hallucinations. As you think about using AI, a common thing that we see as well as agencies are fearful as to accuracy, right? This pops up on every survey outside of AI being the thing that they're focused on. When you get into the fears associated with AI, typically it comes down to hallucinations, accuracy of information. Is it trustworthy? If I have all of my data accessible through a generative prompt, how do I know I can trust it? Because it's still going to leverage language models that go outside of that in order to come back with responses. And then I think you often hear about supply chain attacks. is supply chain vulnerabilities. But what's important to know here is as you think about AI working its way into the existing stuff that you have, this is that whack-a-mole game. This is the game of, what you use, what is free, what may be already present on your phones and your computers is in a race. It's in an arms race to bring AI capabilities and features into your environment so that people can use it to do work better. And that creates a lot of new vulnerabilities because you have to manage that as a part of the process. And as we look at tools that are triggering security incidents, we wanted to frame what are the more common things that are throwing this up? Now, what I want you to look at and take away from this is not that these tools are not secure. It actually means that these tools have heavy utilization within the public sector. What this is telling you is that there is attempts at PII leakage and other things from the employees, the users of these tools that have to be mitigated. So without the right guardrails and governance and adaptive governance on top of this, these are potential exposure threat vectors. Blocking these tools is not always a possibility, right? Because if I'm using Box as my document management system or ChatGPT, Gov, those are the tools that I have selected. But what it does mean is that there's a high frequency of interactions that happen driven by employees, driven by maybe automated transactional API calls that have the potential for exposure back to those threats. And so we see a high degree of this within enterprise document management tools, within a lot of the general productivity standalone AI tools like ChatGPT and others. You see this within connectors that are leveraging AI as a basis of that, like Zapier. You see this within some of the existing, things. We've got Gemini, Perplexity, Grok, HubSpot, Claude, like a lot of these standalone tools that are there, even with some safeguards in place on there, there's still potential exposure that has to be mitigated. Now, the real reality here is that there's not a world where a single AI tool will win. Although there's an arms race for these frontier models that are happening, the reality of government AI and GovTech AI is going to be multiple models because every model is good at something different and it changes every single day, I swear. And so you're going to have to start to think about how do I manage all of these simultaneously? Because you may use an application or you may use an ERP that leverages a certain model that's optimized and specialized for that respective function, but you may use ChatGPT Gov as your general day-to-day productivity tool. Your development teams may use Cursor AI to build code and they may compile it in Claude. So this is just how these workflows are flowing, which shows the importance of I can't just do one. I can't focus on one. I can't select one and expect everyone to go to it. I also can't build a front door and expect everyone to only use that official front door and I abstract all the models. That's not the reality. People are going to go to the path of least resistance. They're going to go to freechatgpt.com and they're going to ask the question there. So you have to secure them all simultaneously.
What
Yeah.
one thing, yeah, one thing I'll just add here, the one that's not on the list there, we Dustin covered it earlier when he was talking about embedded AI, and that's chat based, and there's others like it. One of the interesting things there is that's still a challenge a lot of agencies have on two fronts. One, probably Dustin will talk about in a minute about uncovering which AI is being used by that third party vendor or the provider, sometimes a software provider. They don't always disclose it. But second is that embedded use, then uncovering the risks that were associated with that as well. It's a second degree of usage that's embedded within the application itself. So that's one thing that I think is there's still a lot of work to be done to uncover the embedded AI because pretty much in the next year, every software application you've used or known is going to have some form of AI embedded in it. Most likely, they're not building their own LLMs. They're calling out through an API back to a third party or other foundational model.
Yeah, and we're in the first inning of this game. We're talking about governance on generative AI. Stay tuned for like a future webinar on agentic AI and A2A protocols and how we're going to have to deal with all of that. We'll bring Steve back for that one as well. Now, as we look at these risks and we look at some of the things that are happening across the environment, of course, you'll see IT is a large part of this, not because IT is out doing things that are negative, but because they are ground zero for where AI intersects an organization. A lot of the pilots, a lot of the sandboxes, a lot of the experimentation that's happening across GovTech is happening within technology. And these departments are testing, they're vetting, they're experimenting, they're trying to find ways to build some of the bridges here. So not a huge surprise that this is kind of where we see a lot of exposure as a part of that process. Now, as we look at what are the risks, so we talk about PII. What are people actually throwing into these models that we're detecting and mitigating? Vast majority, outside of some general kind of context-based stuff, driver's license numbers. And again, this doesn't mean that government employees are going in and saying, Steve, I'm going to put your driver's license number and hit enter on that email. It often is that they're working within an existing document that may contain PII. It may be a benefits application. It may be something that they're trying to make more concise, something that is embedded into an experience they already have. I'm working within that existing document. And in me asking the generative prompt to make something more concise or to rewrite it or to translate it, I don't realize as the individual employee that the PII within that document is also being transmitted to that server as it is trying to rewrite it for conciseness. Same thing with bank account numbers and social security numbers and other types of things. These aren't necessarily indications that employees are maliciously leaking that. It just means that employees are working within mission critical data, doing their job, but there's a lack of awareness sometimes in terms of what happens when you ask something to be more concise, when you ask something to be translated, when you want to reword or come up with a better subject line for the email. What actually happens after you hit enter? And I think that's kind of the core aspect of governance that we have to start to deal with. Now, I want to spend a moment, and I know this is something Noam is very much in touch with as well, to talk a little bit about note takers, because this is another threat that we often see, not just from a public record standpoint, but these note takers are invading not just your meetings, but they create a ton of vulnerabilities around data leakage as well, because they don't often generate or originate from your side. It may be someone else's. So, Noam, tell me a little bit about what you're seeing kind of from a note taker standpoint.
Well, for once, for one, I see Otter here, and I think we have an Otter note taker in the audience as well, which I was just checking right now. So that's and there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm not putting anyone on the spot here. I use note takers myself as well. I think in public sector and government, it opens a whole Pandora box and a whole new challenge because when you think about record management and record retention, all of a sudden meetings and output that's generated by transcriptions and recording of these meetings now becomes public record. How do you start managing them? That's one piece of it. And we're seeing shadow AI across the board of these note takers. So it's not just one team's transcription that we're seeing, but rather five or six different tools within a small city, let alone in bigger customers as well. But then the other piece of it is really how those tools behave. They're commoditized, there's high competition on them. So if you take a tool like Read AI or other tools, all great transcription tools, but they're usually trying to push themselves as part of a marketing tactic as well into other environments. And so often I've been in meetings like that myself. I'm sure in the audience people can attest to that too. You join a meeting, the person isn't on, right? But the note taker joined in for that person and is now in that meeting that he's not on it, right? So what does that mean in terms of risk for the agency? Also, then that oftentimes can transfer over to your user. So managing the note takers, I think, is a really great example of a verticalized application that has opened up a big Pandora box for a lot of governments in terms of record management, but also just in terms of managing the AI risk that it possesses as well.
Yeah, and it's one of many domains that you're going to start to see impacted by this as well, which brings us to governance. And I know we talked a lot about it. This doesn't mean you need to go hire a high dollar consultant to come in and, draft a policy and button things up for you. In fact, we see the vast majority of agencies, I would say three-quarters of the agencies I talk to, already have some policy. They just don't know how to pull the trigger on it. They don't know how to move it beyond the PDF. They're trying to figure out, is it the right policy? Is it the right guardrails? And I think as we think about governance, there's a few things that have to be in place here. One, you can't manage what you can't see. You got to have visibility into what's going on within your environment. And that's not just the stuff that you know about and that you've purchased, but the stuff that people are using on their own, that they're bringing in. We talked about BYOD when I was in government. Now we're in BYO AI. People are bringing their own AI into the enterprise. We have to acknowledge it. We see it, but we have to secure it. We have to shore it up. Two, policy. And again, this is adaptive because this is changing as we look at what's happening in the legal tug of war that's going to go on between the states and the feds in 2026 around AI policy. This doesn't mean that we avoid it and wait for that to be figured out. This means that we double down on it and put some basic guardrails in place. Think about it from a risk management standpoint, right? If you operate a safety program, you're going to acknowledge that accidents are going to happen, but you still have to do a safety program to mitigate risk as a part of it. I would say the same is true with AI. You need to have a way to deal with this and start with something. It can evolve, and it will evolve because your state law is going to evolve. The federal guidance is going to evolve. The existing risk frameworks that you may align to, like NIST, are going to evolve. And so find some way to start there. And then enablement. I think this is key because when you start to think about governance and all of this other stuff, you can also go the direction of discouraging official utilization of AI or getting people to actually do AI outside of their government machines and equipment, which is an area you don't want to go. You want to encourage AI utilization in a safe way, and you want to make people part of the process. But you want to do it in a way, I mean, as we think about this at Darwin, you sign a million forms when you sign up to be a government employee, acceptable use, PII, protect data security, all these other things. Employees don't remember what they sign, but it's up for you. It's up to you to remember what they sign and to enforce that at every endpoint. And so that's how we look at that is enablement is basically abstracting complexity. It's finding a way to allow the employee to do what they do best, work, without having to worry about all of the different rules and regulations associated with it. You can educate them along the way. And I think that's how we look at adaptive governance. Now, where do you start? I think there's a few things. One, you got to inventory what you have. And inventory is not a survey monkey survey. Inventory has to be real time. It has to be able to keep up with the changes because this is frequent and this is happening all the time. Two, working group. You might already have IT governance. You might already have a working group tied to AI. Convene them, meet on a regular basis. The landscape is changing. Evaluate the data on how it's changing, new applications that are emerging. Act. Find a way to use data to activate that group so you're not just talking about hypotheticals, but you're identifying potential risk and shoring them up. Three, you want to evaluate your core systems. Steve and I have talked for many years about Franken-suites applications, and AI is going through this moment now where it might be attractive. There's 800 shiny AI objects that are all going after government as an end customer, and you might be, someone that's like, I'll get this for that, and I'll buy this for that. That's creating 800 different data silos where just because there's an AI front end or a conversational front end, that doesn't mean it's a modern technology stack. You need to think about tying this to the core, focusing on those core systems, like taking your ERP and other things and looking at where AI intersects it through that vendor, as opposed to bringing 800 other shiny objects in that each have their own potential vulnerabilities or risk. Same thing with embedded AI versus point solutions as a part of that. Focus on talking to those existing vendors, getting some governance around it, but being partners for them there. And then move forward. Start small, deploy a pilot. We call these launch pads on our side. Find ways to demonstrate AI's potential power, not by launching a chatbot on your website, but by looking at the most mundane, repetitive, low-hanging fruit that's back office that a regular employee is struggling with that will save them a few hours a day, which adds up to significant time savings. Look for those types of things as you kind of go forward as a part of that process as well. Now, QR code and the link. So all of this data and some additional commentary has been packaged up. We'll send a copy of this out to everyone as well as part of our webinar follow-up. But take a look at this, share this with your teams. If you have questions about it, we definitely want to hear. But this is kind of the ungated content and report here as a part of that process. With that, I think we've got some time to kind of shift to some questions and answers. I'll leave this up on the screen for a little bit longer, but let's go to Q&A. If you've got questions, drop them into the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we'll get started.
Yeah, and we already got quite a few coming in. So let me, first of all, Chris, thank you for all the thoughtful insights and questions that you put forward. So let me share some of them, try and cover, and then also put some of the questions to you, Steve and Dustin. So I think there was a question about shadow AI and detection. Thinking about how much of this is going to be on IT and on the agency side. Absolutely, I think it's going to be something that has to be beyond the policy. And Dustin was talking about it. So no longer just putting out a PDF or updating and expecting employees to know about it, but rather having system to be aware of it. That doesn't mean Big Brother. It actually means that you're helping them stay within the guardrails that you as a public entity are required to have, and then helping them through those guardrails to innovate and use the tools to drive efficiency and productivity. And that's kind of the right balance that we think works best. Another question that came, it's kind of a technical one, but worth answering. Maybe Dustin, I'll put this for you. So definition of AI, it's more of a comment, but I think one we can address. So definition of AI all over the place, hard to get everyone on the same page. From Anthony, it's a good point. I think one thing that's worth asking is let's say, how do we think about identifying AI tools today, Dustin, within the environment and maybe some of the challenges around that as well?
Yeah, I think this is a great question and one that we get a lot. I mean, even if you look at state level policy around different AI, there are so many different flavors and definitions of artificial intelligence. And I would argue just when we got it, kind of solidified around generative AI, agentic AI came into the building and starts to blur the lines associated with human in the loop. And so I think as you look at this, I mean, one, you definitely want to look at inventorying anything that has any type of AI signatures within it as a starting point. And so we have a broader definition as we look at AI because we want all of the above. We want the stuff that has generative capabilities, as well as the stuff that may be, autonomous or semi-autonomous, with some human oversight as a part of the process. Because at the end of the day, they're all going to be part of the same regulatory structure. I think in terms of the definition thing, this is where I would look to some of the frameworks as a basis of trying to move the needle on it, like NIST, AI, RMF framework, and other things have a set of certain types of definitions, but I think it's one that we're going to have to just continue to evolve and look for signatures associated with where AI is delivered, and hopefully get some consistency from a state and local policy level, but acknowledge that it is an uphill battle because it's changing so frequently.
Yeah, and just on that, on the technical side of it, for example, Darwin, we have a full AI registry, right, that we validate as AI tools. So when it's embedded, even called out, we're looking at that registry against it. Those are tools that are known to use AI. And if you want to go deeper than that, there's bifurcation of AI from generative AI to more machine learning, traditional. So that really is a question that it's a Pandora box that we can dive deeper. And another question that came on was about embedded AI. So I'll tackle this one quickly. We talked a lot about embedded AI and whether it'll be legislative or not. That was the question. I think absolutely there'll be some language around that. We already see some of it coming up across the states and maybe even the federal side. But I would say that it's worth noting that that is where it's going to be the hardest to actually enforce from a just a check the box. So if you're asking the vendor, hey, like, do you use this AI? If you do, you're going to go through 3 months of AI security. Often they're not going to check that box. And so having a mechanism where it's beyond just a procurement checkbox is going to be something that's going to be very important for you guys to think about. Um, Let me pose another question that came about here that I wanted to ask. So one of the questions is for you, Steve, from the survey data, what we're seeing, it's kind of unclear what is motivating people to use the AI tools today. So is it innovation? Is it pressure from the team using it? Efficiency gains? What's the silver lining here and how we drive adoption across these
So,
agencies?
so based on conversations with customers, knowledge of the marketplace, surveys like this, and looking at other participant surveys, I'd have to say it's a combination of all the above. It's a holistic loop surrounding this population, and there's a lot of different drivers coming at them from various different places. You'll have people saying, "Is this something that we should use? Should we catch up on this? How do we catch up on this?" To the earlier point, there may be a driver from the population. Are you putting these tools to use? What's your policies? If we're paying you to be in office or to administrate our city, are you actually taking a look at these tools and seeing what applies to us? I mean, I think the bottom line is this: if you really want to understand it and you want to have a sort of a thumbnail definition of its applicability, anything that's a manual task involving data that could be automated is a candidate for an AI application. Anything that involves a workflow that you're currently putting mind share and resources against is something that can be automated and then therefore begets an AI application. So this message is starting to creep into the marketplace because our company plus some of our competitors are actually starting to introduce the conversation. The conversation being, we want to provide you with tools that enable you to do your work better. So if they're hearing this and they're seeing this at shows, and they're going to trade shows, they're hearing people like Dustin, myself, sit around and prattle on about how we're using this and who's having success with it. What you're going to see, because the government space is a space of reference and a space of example. It's who do I know, who do I trust, and who's putting something to use that might be of use to my constituents. To that end, as we start seeing where these organic case studies trickle up and become part of the conversation, you're going to see increased pressure, increased knowledge, increased drive to aggregate the knowledge, to bring it in-house, to see where it applies. So to the long answer to your questions, all of those are factors. And as this becomes more and more uh, pervasive in terms of our space, you're going to see, to Dustin's point, yet more providers, yet more shiny tools. I think anybody listening to this from a government capacity has to take a step back. If it doesn't make sense, if you can't immediately understand how applying XYZ solution is going to affect XYZ workflow that you're struggling with now, and it doesn't create an obvious efficiency, walk away or just wait till it's more mature. But use things that make sense. AI really isn't doing anything new. It's based on a language model. It's based on a mass of data that is able to very quickly put things together and synthesize a solution. So if you can do it, but you can imagine that a different version of yourself, an agentic version or a virtual version, could do it a little faster, then it makes sense. If you can't see that at this juncture, it doesn't make sense. So that's sort of the answer to the question.
I agree. I think focusing on the output and value rather than the shiny object, which there are lots of. Okay, let's try and cover maybe two more questions. One, first of all, I'm happy to that the new link works for those that were asking about that. Also, feel free to ping us. We could send that. I think Ben Palacio had a great question on the data, and maybe Dustin, you can cover this one. So when talking about some of the web-based or public-facing applications, there's a big question on how do you manage the data security between that and around the policies between the internet, the intranet, making sure it's still controlled by the agency itself? So how do you think about data privacy, data governance around that exposure as well?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben. I think data governance has to be part of this conversation. I mean, as we look at even just some of the early examples of where data classification has failed internal utilization of AI, where you started to see people that were using organizational kind of intranet chat bots that were all of a sudden able to ask, how much does Steve make? And, give me his last performance review. And they were able to get that. So having those classifications set up, like it's the unsexy stuff, is a fundamental part of it. I do think there's a challenge as we start to think about the knowledge bases. Like right now, when I look at like a lot of the chatbot conversations and the website bots, we're duplicating internal knowledge bases externally to host on a chatbot to leverage as a basis of people asking those questions and those types of things. I think with the right data governance foundation, we can start to look at doing less of the duplication and more focus on exposing the right level of data that can be updated on a regular basis. I think today the CMS has been kind of the underlying, data repository, so to speak, for a lot of that information, or core systems like agendas, minutes, those types of things that are transactional, already public information. So it's a little bit easier. I think where this conversation has to evolve is when we start to think about when agents have the ability or when AI has the ability to transact on an individual's behalf. Much wider conversation as we start to think about that. But I would argue that's where this conversation is going, right? If I go to our website, I don't want to use a chat bot to get an FAQ back to me in natural language form. I want to do something. I want to reestablish services. I want to pay a bill. I want to do whatever it is. So I think as we look at these quote unquote chat bots, we're going to have to very quickly move into not just the data governance side, but also identity and look at other types of, safeguards that need to be in place in order to allow me to do something.
Yeah, and I would just on the security side and the cybersecurity side, thinking about how you protect those you know exposed backend systems that you might want to keep the data there. One thing that usually we would say, and we do at Darwin, is thinking about your ownership in your internal private cloud or your environment, and then from there bifurcating. So a good example is PRR and record management,
Mhm.
where you may want to automate some of the AI retention and governance, but then you may want to add on that a layer of redaction when it's going out to the public. So you're able to automate some of those components as well, where it goes out to the public. So taking from the public records world, similar type of model on the back-end systems that you want to keep the security from. All right, well, let's do one last question. So, if keeping it practical for our audience here and for everyone that's stayed on, this question is for both of you, but we'll start with you, Steve. So, if you were to think about one thing that they could take and do in the next 90 days, a concrete step that helped them reduce their AI risk, doesn't slow innovation, if anything fosters it, what would that be? What would be your first step?
Reduce AI risk, mitigate all the things we've been talking about. I'd say spend some time doing some diligence, which is what you should do with any type of move or acquisition. Spend some time doing some diligence, see what other agencies are doing. Look at governance, look at GovTech, governing GovTech, look at some of the publications surrounding the space. Try to get your arms around what steps to take to safeguard yourself. Because at the end of the day, you really don't want to put the solution in front of security. So security is of the utmost importance in this conversation. Gather the data, see what's being done, see what's being said, and come up with a framework to put guardrails around what the use cases for AI may be within your agency. So I'd say do your research, do your homework, do your research first. Talk to people like Dustin, talk to people like Gnome, talk to consultants that actually play in the space and bring those viewpoints into the equation.
Excellent. Dustin, what's your take? Add to that to close us off.
Yeah, so I think it's it's a big topic, right? We could do a whole other webinar on that. I mean, I think one, you have to do something with governance. You got to take a first step somewhere, whether it's, starting with a policy, which I just dropped a link in the chat where you can use our free policy creation engine to create a policy, or whether it's starting with identifying ways to inventory what you have, or having a conversation with us about, putting some safeguards in place. You need to move forward and do a step. There's a lot here that is going to rapidly unfold. There's the public records implications here. There's new cybersecurity threats. There's people that are, jailbreaking existing models that are creating new vulnerabilities. Like, this is a totally different landscape that is going to require a different way of approaching this. But the last thing you want to do is sit on the sidelines and do nothing and wait for someone else to figure it out. Anything you can do adds a layer of risk mitigation to it that makes you better off. And so start to talk to other agencies, call us, work on adapting your policy. Just pull the trigger so that you can start to de-risk your overall approach, because you may be a small city, you may be a large city, but people inside your organization are using AI and they're setting you up for vulnerability and risks today. So don't ignore the opportunity to bridge that.
Okay, excellent. And I know we're up against time, and maybe we'll take because I see I missed the one hand raise. So Nikhil, did you have a question with the hand raise?
I'll give Nikhil, I'll give you permission to talk if you have a question.
Can't.
You will have to. There we go. Now you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we got you
Yes.
loud and clear.
Oh, awesome. No, this has been great conversation. I was just wondering if you all are spotting any organizations that are leaders in this space, and if just as a reference, any of the attendees could actually, also follow some of the work that they are doing.
Outside of the great state of Georgia, there are, yeah. I mean, I think this is a conversation that's kind of like smart cities. If you think back to that, where if you ask what city is a smart city, everybody is doing different things that are exceptionally good. Some cities like San Jose have focused on community and the GovAI coalition and others. Others have focused on governance and building guardrails and foundation. Others have focused on internal infrastructure. We have some states that are focusing on, agents and MCP servers and other things. So I think there's a lot of pockets that exist across the country of where people are doing things exceptionally well. And part of what we're going to do with our webinars and our podcast and more conversations is expose these pockets. So rather than having kind of fragmented approaches to how this is happening, we're starting to connect the dots with good ideas that are worth sharing and replicating. So I think there's a lot out there. We've been incredibly encouraged, even by our own customer set, just to see how innovative agencies are and how they're leaning really into this moment to do more than launch a chatbot or build a conversational interface into their HR policy. It's been really incredible to see the sophistication that's emerging here. But I would say it varies, in level of maturity and kind of use case by agency to agency.
Yeah, and Nikhil, just not to leave you without kind of one or two examples. I'm happy to be the one to pick one or two. So there's many, but I think some good examples. And what's cool here is that AI is a levels the playing field. So small cities can act like big cities in terms of what they do. So leaders that I would mention, Chris McMaster, CIO in Corona, has been really balancing innovation with governance in a nice way. We see even transit agency like Cap Metro in Texas that are doing some interesting work there as well. A lot of agencies in Washington, I'll give an example, a really small city, Lake Stevens, where their mayor is forward thinking, Mayor Daley, and they're doing a lot of things that is a city of 50,000. I mean, Steve, you mentioned that's the majority of cities across the US. They're able to do things that state agencies have not done yet around governance, and then also in terms of agentic AI. And so those are some examples I would say, and like Dustin said, it's a level playing field where it's not only the big usual suspects that are pushing forward, it's some of those smaller players that are able to take a little more risk, be a little more nimble in terms of moving forward and putting some stuff in place.
Thank you both.
All right, so I think we're gonna adjourn with that. And I want to say thank you to Steve and to Dustin and to everyone that joined. This was a great discussion, great conversation, great questions. We'll be sure to share the report if you already have the QR as well. If not, also feel free to reach out to us, LinkedIn, email. Happy to continue this conversation. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dustin and Steve.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.